Here's the project I've got today. I'm going to take this bucket off of this excavator, this little excavator, this is a PC35, and put that plate on there, that mounting plate on there. A few years back, I had a wood splitter built. I found this company online I think in Indiana or Iowa or someplace back in the Midwest. I made these wood splitters to mount it onto excavators. I thought that was a pretty good idea. I called them up and had them make me one, but I had the wood splitter mounted up on a pad to mount onto a skid steer, onto a, what do they call it, a bob tack attachment, so I could mount it on my skid steer to use it on it. And then I had them make me a plate, an adapter plate that I could put on the excavators and mount that wood splitter on the excavators if I wanted to use it on that. And that's what I've got here. That plate is made with sets of holes so that I can use it either on the PC35 or on the PC30. They both have different mount geometry on the buckets. I've never really thought much of wood splitters. I mean, when I first saw them, I thought that would be a pretty good idea. It'd save some work. But once I got to looking at them and seeing how they worked, they actually create more work than they solve or they eliminate. You got to set up the wood splitter, and then you got to move every piece of wood after it's cut over to the wood splitter and split it up, and you have to turn it by hand under the splitter, and it just seems like there's a lot of lifting and bending over involved in that. Probably okay if you're using small diameter wood with a lot of knots in it that's hard to split, but I can split a load of good wood faster than 2 men or 3 men can with a wood splitter just by hand with an axe. Occasionally might have to use a splitting maul and a wedge, but most of the time I can bust them open and bust them down into burnable sized chunks with an axe faster than these guys can handle them with a wood splitter. In fact, a lot of these guys that I've seen around here, I can cut a load of wood by myself, split it and load it faster than 2 guys or 3 guys can, even without a wood splitter, or especially with a wood splitter. And that's not bragging, that's a fact. I've done it many times, and that's just because that's the kind of guys I grew up around. Was standard operating procedure. That my old man would have had a fit if I'd have come home with a half a load of wood by myself after being out in the woods for a day. And I see a lot of guys come back with just a half a load of wood. To me, when we went out to get a load of wood, it was a load of wood. You'd build a rack, cut some poles and stuff, and stick up in the bed of the pickup and load it up. And if it wasn't at least as high as the cab of the pickup in the bed, we'd only had a half a load. And I just figured it was easier to split wood by hand than it was to split it with a wood splitter. But as I've gotten older, I can't handle that anymore. The picking the wood up and moving it around is kind of hard on me, and splitting it, if I split a half a load of wood now, I'm down for a day or so. Like I said, I see those wood splitters, and you've got to move all the wood to the wood splitter and do a lot of moving it around. So when I saw this one that was mounted to an excavator, I thought that was a heck of a good idea, because you can just move the excavator around and swing the boom around and stuff like that and pick the wood up, and you don't have to hand handle all that wood all the time. Now, it works kind of the same way on the Bobcat, but with it on the Bobcat is a lot more maneuvering around, because the Bobcat, of course, the wood splitter is fixed to the machine, so you kind of have to move the machine around to get to the wood to maneuver it around. I've used it quite a bit on that, and it works pretty good, but it does make kind of a mess when you got to move the Bobcat around. It tears the ground up a little bit. So the idea of doing it here with the excavator, that seemed like a better idea. You could reach out and grab the wood in different places, pick it up, even set it over the trailer and split it and drop it right in the trailer and eliminate a lot of the handling. So that's why I had that made like that. Well, I'm going to mount that up to this excavator. We'll probably be splitting some wood up here sometime in the future, in the near future, to get it ready for next fall. But my primary purpose right now is to put this bob tack attachment onto the excavator, because I've got a bunch of stuff up here in a real soft area that I need to move, and I can't get the Bobcat in there with the fork. So what I figured on doing was mounting this thing on the excavator and then setting it up so I can put the forks on there, and then I can get back into that rough ground and move that. So we've got the bucket disassembled from the excavator boom, and I can move that over now and start hooking it up to that plate. I got this plate on there. I got this pin in first, and it took a little bit to get it lined up. It didn't want to go through these bosses here. Probably could have had a reamer or something to clean those out, but I eventually got it through there, and it slid through all the way. Now that's got a collar on this end, but I may want to make a shim. There's some shims to go in there behind that collar. I'm pretty sure that's what I want to do. This one here, that one was tough to get in there, trying to get it to line up, and I finally took a hammer and started the pin through from the thumb on there and into the boss on that plate there, and it wouldn't go through there. I thought it was jamming up, banging into the boom here, the stick here, but it wasn't. It just wasn't going through. I finally went and got a bigger hammer, and it went through. Then it went through too far, and I had to back it out of there, and that was a chore. Well, anyway, now I've got it in there, and it's not really intended to be on there with this thumb on there, but I want to have the thumb on there. I've got the hydraulics plumbed into it, and I'd have to take the hoses off and put plugs on those lines, which I'm eventually going to have to do if I put the wood splitter on there, but I don't want to do that right now, and I may want to use the thumb for something it's handy to use. So anyway, this pin that goes through here sticks out about 6 inches on this other side still, and it's right up tight against this boss right here, and then there's a couple inches space in here. I've got spacers for it that fit in between the bucket and the thumb when they had the bucket on there, but they won't fit down in by this boss, so I may have to go make some kind of a spacer to go in there behind this boss, and then use the spacers in there for that. So I guess that's what I'm going to have to do, is figure out some way to make some spacers there, some filler pieces. That's on there, that's going, so I can get that in the rest of the way. It'd take some jiggery pokery to get that pin lined up with that thumb, the boss on that thumb, but we can do it. Go dig out what I can, see what I've got to use to make a spacer for that. Well, it took some doing, but I got that thing on there, and it fits up pretty good now. I put the shims that came off of the bucket and the thumb, 3 of them, on the front up here where this main pin goes, this front pin goes, to shim it out. And then on this other end here, get over here, on this pin where it goes through the thumb, there was a pretty big gap in there for that pin. It's a pretty long pin, a lot longer than what the standard one is for the bucket. So anyway, they'd had shims on both sides of it to shim that thumb out. I did put a shim in there. I found a piece of tubing, a pipe that fit over that. It's actually a piece of this bleachers from the gym that we salvaged here years ago. I've been using to make all kinds of stuff with. Anyway, I found a piece of that was large enough OD diameter to fit over that pin, or large enough ID diameter to fit over that pin, and a small enough OD diameter to fit inside of this boss here. So that slipped in there. I had to drive that pin back out a ways to get that in there, but we got that in there, and I put a single shim out here on the outside there and a bolt through that to hold everything, to keep that pin from coming out. Although I don't think it'll come out, but things might get a little bit sloppy here. But anyhow, that's together. This isn't going to be too much work, or do too much work. We'll do a little bit of stuff with the forks, and then probably some wood splitting with it, but that works pretty good. A regular bob tack attachment has a round pin that goes down into a slot in the attachment portion of it, or the bob tack itself has a pin that goes down into the attachment. itself. Well, this one, they didn't quite make it like that. They've got a pretty wide piece of steel machined and fit down in a pocket there that sticks down through the bottom, and so there's a wide slot in the wood splitter attachment rather than a small slot. So I'm going to have to modify, I don't think I want to modify the plate, the attachment on the forklift for that wide of a slot. I think I maybe want to cut down the pin that they've got in there, the wide piece of flat stock that they've got in there. I might want to cut it down to fit into the existing pins on there. So that's the only thing I've got to do now, is fix that. This is what they've got fixed up for this, is this plate right here. So I probably got to redo that a little bit to fit in the forks and the regular Bobtack attachments. Yeah, that worked on there, that fit on there. We got that fitted on there now, and I got to get the grease gun and grease up all of those fittings on there. I greased those pins up when I drove them in there, but they all need grease in them. They're all dry, so the whole machine needs to be greased up. So I guess I better get that done. Went up to get the forks for the forklift for the Bobcat, but there's a bar across the top of it where the plate slides up into on the top. There was a bar across the middle of that on that forks for the Bobcat. So I wouldn't fit in there without cutting some out of this plate and flattening it out. The plate that I put here on the excavator. But I looked over at the teleforks here, and it'll fit fine on that. And it even has a wider slot on the bottom for those lock plates to fit down into. So that'll work even better. That'll work good. This thing's a little heavier than the regular forks are. If I take that man lift off of there, it'll be fine. I could even hook the hydraulics up on that and use the telefork portion of it. Hook the hydraulics up to the hydraulics for the thumb. Well, this is the lock pin that goes down there on that, and this already was slotted out down here for that. So I was just able to put that right down in there. And then that other set of forks has a plate, that's a reinforcement piece that goes from about here across to the other side. So this plate here, this attachment wouldn't fit in there because it's got, it's just, what is that, 3/8 inch thick steel all the way across there. It fits up underneath here. Well, it wouldn't work on that other set of forks because there's reinforcement in there, so without cutting that off. So anyway, this will work out better. I don't have to do any adjustment or anything on this set of forks here at all. It's got hoses on here. I'll have to tie them off, but that's raises and lowers that, so I could even use that by disconnecting the thumb and hooking it up to that. I'm not going to do that. That's not the point. I'll take that man cage off of there, and we're ready to go to work. These are my regular Bobcat forks. This is what I originally intended to put on there. As you can see down here, there's a divide here between these two pockets for the pin that holds it on. And I think I would have had to extend this pin out, this pocket out wider or something, I think, to get that to fit. I was going to put it on there and see. But then this has this angle piece, or this piece welded in right here for a brace. So that plate wouldn't fit up in here. It goes up in underneath that, but it wouldn't fit up in here without cutting out a relief for that plate right there. Now, this is what I had in mind for that. We've got a pile of insulation up there. It's cement covered insulation. I think it's 1.5 inch thick styrofoam, and it's 2 by 4 foot sheets. It was stuff that we salvaged. They took off the roof of the gym of the school when they did that, and it's, like I said, it's the top of it was covered with cement. So all that's stacked up there. There's a bunch of that stacked up there, and we need to get it down out of there, as that turns out that that's state land, and the state is going to trade that land to the Forest Service, and they wanted the stuff cleaned up off of it before the trade goes through. So wanted to get that out of there. So that gets those forks up there where we don't have to pack that stuff any. I can just pull it off of the pile there, stick it on a pallet, and then swing it out of there with the excavator, and that's too soft over in there to take the Bobcat. It'll eventually dry up this summer if it dries up, but once it start working in there with the Bobcat, that it'll just sink out of sight in there. That's just mud right down in there, just a mud hole. So that's why I wanted to do it with a little excavator. We've got some more of that up here to move. Again, I probably could have got into that with a skid steer, but it'll be a lot easier with the forks there on the excavator. So we'll get that stuff moved out of the way. Well, yeah, that's set up now. We can go to work moving stuff. We got a nice day. Today is pretty near gone now. It's supposed to be another nice day tomorrow and then start raining. So I got to fly in the morning. Once I get done, I'll start getting those stacks moved.